Rancher found a beaten, paralyzed native woman by the road, then realized who she really was. The wind moved slow over the prairie that morning, carrying nothing but the hush of dust and the creak of brittle grass. The sun hadn't fully risen. It merely bruised the horizon with a wash of pale amber, like the sky itself was healing from something. Far in the distance, the outline of cattle moved like breath, quiet, constant, unaware. The rancher stood by the edge of his broken fence line, hat tipped low, boots planted deep in the early frost. He didn't move much anymore, just stared into the land like it might finally give him an answer it had been hiding for too long. His breath came out in slow clouds, not from the cold, but from years that sat heavy on the chest. Behind him, the cabin stood tired, its roof bowed like a prayer. No smoke in the chimney, no dog barking, just stillness, the kind that didn't come from peace, but from a silence earned after losing more than a man should. He reached down, tightened a rusted wire around a crooked post, the gesture practiced, mechanical, as if the work kept his bones from giving up. A hawk cried high above, cutting across the sky, and his eyes followed it, then dropped. That's when he saw her, lying in the ditch like the earth had tried to hide her. Her body was still, half covered in dirt and gravel, limbs twisted awkwardly, like they didn't belong to her anymore. Her hair was long and dark, tangled with weed and thorn. Blood, dry and cracked, trailed down from her temple, the skin beneath it browned and bruised. She wasn't moving. He didn't speak, just knelt. His hand hovered above her face, trembling, unsure. He looked around. The road was empty, the prairie untouched. This place had a way of hiding its cruelty in plain sight. He placed 2 fingers gently against her neck. A pulse, weak, but there. The relief didn't show in his face, only in the way his shoulders dropped just a little. She wasn't from here. That much he could tell. But something about her face unsettled him. Not because she was a stranger, but because she didn't feel like one. He stood, eyes scanning the flat nothingness around him, then bent low and whispered something only the wind could hear. Carefully, he slipped one arm beneath her shoulders, the other under her knees, slow, firm, like lifting something sacred. Her head leaned against his chest, limp as snowfall. He took one step, then another, boots crunching dry gravel, the sound sharp in the silence. Behind them the sky broke open. The sun rose fully now. Not bright, but enough to reveal the wounds on her back and something else hidden beneath the bruises, a marking on her shoulder. A small symbol, faded but familiar. He stopped mid-step. His eyes stayed on that mark. For a moment he didn't breathe. Then he walked on, carrying her toward the cabin. The next morning, the town square buzzed faintly with the usual rhythm, boots scraping dust, a baby's soft cry, the dry knock of a broom against wood. The rancher rode in slow, the woman wrapped in his old blanket behind him on the saddle. Heads turned, but no one stepped forward. They watched him like he was dragging a ghost through daylight. Eyes narrowed, whispers followed, but not one soul helped him down. He dismounted and cradled her in his arms again. Her body was limp, her head resting against his shoulder, as if life had not yet agreed to return. He walked straight toward the clinic, past the saloon, the store, and the faces that used to nod at him when he still had a wife, a child, and something to offer. Now they just stared like his presence was an inconvenience they'd rather forget. Outside the clinic, he paused. Doc Murray stood on the porch, arms crossed, brows low. His white coat flapped in the wind, but his face didn't move. You know, we don't take in outsiders, the doctor said. The rancher didn't speak. He adjusted his grip and took a step forward. I said, we don't treat them. We've got limited beds as it is, someone chuckled nearby. A young man leaning against the post office. The mayor's boy. She looks like she crawled out of the woods. Maybe leave her there, he muttered. The crowd didn't laugh, but no one scolded him either. Just silence. The kind that smells like rust and old blood. The rancher's jaw tightened. His boots stayed planted. His eyes, sunburnt and empty, met the doctor's with quiet steel. I carried her here, he said, voice low. She didn't ask for this. The doctor snorted, stepping down from the porch. Then take her back where she came from. We treat folks who belong here. Something in the crowd shifted. A woman near the bakery looked down at her hands. An old man coughed into his sleeve. Just then, a soft voice cut through the thick air. "She does belong." It came from an old native woman, white braids, worn boots, back straight. No one had noticed her walk in from the edge of the street. "She's the daughter of Red Elk, born on this land, long before your fences ever stood." A hush fell. Even the mayor's boy looked sideways now. The rancher turned to the elder woman, his face still unreadable. "You sure?" he asked. The woman nodded once. "Her name is Kaya. She was taken when she was a child." Doc Murray hesitated. The tension cracked. He looked down, then finally stepped aside. "Put her on the table." "I'll see what I can do." The rancher didn't nod. He walked past him, into the clinic, carrying the woman who used to belong to no one, and now suddenly belonged to everyone, and no one at once. Outside, the crowd began to disperse. No words, just the sound of wind through dry leaves. But something had shifted. Not enough to heal, but enough to unsettle the silence. She slept for 3 days. No words, no movement. Just breath, shallow and faint, like the soul inside her was weighing whether to return or not. The rancher sat outside the cabin most nights, sharpening tools that no longer worked, carving wood he'd never sell. He kept the fire low, the door open, and his voice locked away. She needed quiet, and maybe he did too. On the 4th morning, a rider came. He arrived at sunrise, slow and steady. A tall figure wrapped in a long oilskin coat, boots caked with red dirt, and eyes so calm they unnerved more than any shout could. The rancher watched from the porch, one hand resting near the rifle, not out of fear, just habit. The stranger dismounted, tied his horse, and stood still, not asking, not explaining. "You got a girl inside?" the man asked, his voice low, dry like pine smoke. The rancher nodded once. "Is her name Kaya?" The stranger said. Another pause. "She didn't say," the rancher replied. The stranger stepped forward, slow and careful. "I'm her brother." The rancher's fingers curled slightly on the chair arm, eyes narrowing. "You sure?" "She has a scar under her left rib," the man said. "Fell on a stone when she was 8. I never forgot the sound." The rancher studied him, not his words but his weight. The way he stood, like someone who'd carried guilt longer than he'd carried weapons. Finally, the rancher nodded toward the door. "She's in there." "Ain't walked yet." "Might not." The man didn't move. "I'm not here to take her, just to sit close." So she knows someone waited. Later that day, the stranger chopped wood without being asked. He cleaned the troughs, fixed the barn latch, and repaired a section of the roof that had been whistling in the wind for months. Not a word exchanged, just nods, small glances. Mutual silence, like men who understood how loss doesn't ask permission before it settles in. That night, the rancher ladled stew into 2 bowls and placed a third on the floor near Kaya's bed. She hadn't opened her eyes, but the bowl was always empty by morning. As the 2 men sat near the hearth, the stranger finally broke the silence. "I thought she died," he said. "I thought I'd buried her in my dreams for nothing." The rancher didn't answer, just added another log to the fire. The room filled with the soft pop of sap and smoke. The next morning, the rancher walked into the room and found Kaya's eyes open, faint, distant, but awake. He didn't speak. He simply took the cup of water and held it to her lips. Her fingers moved, weak, trembling, trying to hold it herself. Their hands touched, and in that single moment, soft, unspoken, something shifted. Not trust. Not yet, but something close to it. Like the edge of winter softening beneath thawing soil. Snow began to fall on the 5th day. Thin, drifting flakes that didn't settle much but whispered of the cold creeping in from the mountains. The cabin, tucked beneath 2 tired pines, stood quiet like an old secret. Inside, time moved in quiet loops. Firewood stacked and restacked, soup warmed and cooled, blankets adjusted, wounds cleaned with gentle hands and careful silence. The stranger stayed. He took the cot by the door, rising before first light to bring water from the well, sometimes returning with herbs, roots, or whatever his long silence gathered from the woods. The rancher, still cautious, said little, but never stopped him. He too knew what it was to stay close to someone because memory refused to let go. Kaya didn't speak. Her eyes followed light across the ceiling or blinked slowly at the soft hiss of the fire. When they changed her bandages, she didn't flinch. But when the rancher once left a carved horse figurine by her bedside, an old thing he used to make for children, he caught the faintest tremble in her throat. Like her silence had been stirred just slightly from the inside. Each night they cooked in shifts. The stranger cleaned the trout. The rancher ground dried corn. They didn't talk about recipes. They just did what needed doing. On the 8th night, Kaya tried to sit up. Her arms shook. The rancher moved forward instinctively, but stopped when her brother raised a quiet hand, not to prevent help, but to let her fail with dignity. She fell back into the blanket, exhaling hard. But she looked at them. For the first time, really looked. Eyes darker than storm clouds, but calm. Neither man smiled, but something softer passed between them, unspoken. They fixed the roof together, one board at a time. The stranger hammered. The rancher held the nails. Below, Kaya watched from the window, her gaze resting not on their hands, but on the rhythm of their effort, the silence between them that didn't demand anything, didn't explain anything, just stayed one afternoon. As the wind picked up and the trees rattled like old bones, the rancher entered with an old coat he'd found in a chest. He placed it near Kaya's bed, along with boots that didn't quite match. He didn't look at her, just set them down and walked out. But she reached out and touched the coat that night, ran her fingers along the frayed lining, pressed it to her chest like memory might leak from the seams. The next day she whispered her first word, water. The rancher was tending the fire. He turned, not sure he'd heard right. She met his gaze, steady, fragile, unafraid. He nodded once and brought the cup. As she drank, he held the cup firm, but not controlling. Her hand grazed his, and for the first time he didn't move away. Neither did she. Outside, the snow came thicker now. Not wild, just enough to muffle the world into something slower, softer. Inside, 3 souls who'd once been scattered by pain now existed in a fragile stillness. Not healed, not whole, but quietly surviving. And in that small shelter, silence finally felt less like a wound and more like a language. It came without warning, the sound of hooves on frozen dirt, echoing sharp through the bare trees like a storm with no clouds. The rancher stepped onto the porch, hand instinctively resting on the frame of the door, eyes narrowed beneath his hat brim. 3 riders, badges, guns, faces that didn't bother with warmth. Sheriff Dunley sat tall in the saddle, coat buttoned clean, silver star glinting like a lie. Behind him, 2 deputies flanked his sides, younger, crueler in silence. The law didn't come all the way out here unless it carried something heavier than justice. "You've been keeping someone that don't belong here," the sheriff said, voice casual like a snake warming on a rock. Word got out. The rancher didn't answer. He just shifted slightly, enough to block the doorway with his body. Inside, Kaya sat up now. Not fully, but enough to hear every word through the wooden walls. Her brother stood near the back, hand resting on the edge of a kitchen knife, not aggressive, just aware, harboring a fugitive's one thing, Dunley continued, tipping his hat back. But taking in an Indian woman, paralyzed no less, well, folks think that kind of mercy smells like guilt. The wind blew hard. A shutter banged against the side of the cabin like a warning. "She's not a fugitive," the rancher said. "No," the sheriff smirked. "Then why'd her name come up in a mining ledger from 8 years ago? You think we forgot about Red Elk's girl? She was part of that protest near Copper Ridge. Things went south. 1 man ended up dead. Miners want closure, and closure needs a scapegoat." The rancher stared at him unmoved. Not because he didn't believe the danger, but because fear had long ago run out of places to live in his body. "She can't walk," the rancher said quietly. "That don't mean she can't hang," one deputy muttered, just loud enough. Silence fell hard. Then came the choice. Run, into the forest, into snow, into nowhere. But with Kaya barely able to stand, that wasn't escape. Fight. 3 against 2, and one of them wounded. Or stand, not with fists, but with something deeper, something heavier than guns. The rancher stepped forward, slow. The sheriff's hand moved slightly toward his holster, but the rancher just reached behind him and pulled the carved horse figurine from his pocket. He held it out. "This belonged to my daughter," he said. "She died 5 winters ago. I buried her where the sun hits the hill first every morning. I haven't carved since, until I found Kaya." The sheriff frowned. "She's not a criminal. She's someone trying to live." The rancher tossed the figurine into the snow, watched it disappear under white. "You want to take her," he said, his voice steady as cold iron. "You'll have to drag her past my bones. No shout, no threat. Just a line in the dirt no man had crossed in years." For a moment nothing moved. Then the sheriff tugged his reins. "We'll be back," he said. With papers, they rode off, dust and snow behind them. The rancher turned, walked inside, and shut the door. He didn't speak to Kaya. He just placed the kettle back on the fire and returned to his seat. She watched him, her fingers lightly gripping the edge of her blanket, not in fear, but in quiet recognition. That day, the cabin stopped being shelter. It became resistance. 3 days later, the riders returned. No warning this time. No talk, just snow crushed under hooves and the crack of winter wind against hard leather saddles. The sheriff came with a piece of paper now, legal, signed, and soaked with the arrogance of men who'd never bled for the land they claimed to own. The rancher saw them through the window. He didn't flinch. He just set the kettle off the fire and walked to the coat rack, slipping on the same old hat he'd worn the day his daughter was buried. Kaya was sitting upright in bed now, wrapped in her brother's coat, her face pale but eyes like sharpened flint. He looked at her. No words passed. Only a nod, small, final, understood. When he opened the door, the sheriff didn't wait. "She's coming with us," he said. No more talk. The paper shook slightly in his gloved hand, not from fear, but from the cold truth that this land respected silence more than law. The rancher didn't look at the paper. He looked at the man. "You know she didn't kill that miner." "She was there," Dunley barked. "She resisted. She led others to fight back." "She was a child," the rancher said. The sheriff stiffened. "Law doesn't care what age you are when you burn company property." Behind him, one of the deputies reached for cuffs. That's when the stranger stepped out, Kaya's brother. His hands were open, visible, but his stare made the wind pause. "She's not going anywhere," he said calmly. "You planning to die over this?" The sheriff sneered. The rancher took one slow step forward. "No one's dying today," he said, voice low as ash. "But if you cross this line, something in you will," the sheriff laughed, a dry, bitter sound. Then Kaya's voice cut through it all, soft, measured, final. "I remember the man who died." They turned to her. She had pulled herself into the doorway, one hand braced against the frame, legs trembling under their own weight. Sweat glistened on her brow, but she stood. The entire world held its breath. "He struck a child with the butt of his rifle," she said. She wasn't moving. "I pulled him off." He tripped, hit his head on the rail. "That's all?" She looked at the sheriff. "You're not here for justice. You're here for obedience." The snow fell harder now. The deputies shifted. Something fragile cracked behind the sheriff's eyes. Not doubt, not guilt, but recognition. The kind of recognition that burns slower than shame. "You can walk," one deputy whispered. "Not far," she replied, voice trembling. "But enough." The rancher stepped beside her, one arm just close enough to catch her if she fell, but not touching. It wasn't pity. It was permission. The sheriff stared at them all, 3 broken people standing like oak trees in a storm. He folded the paper. Didn't rip it. Just slid it back into his coat. "We'll let the mining company know she's dead," he muttered. They never wanted a trial. Just silence, and then he turned. This time, they didn't ride fast. They rode slow, like men leaving something behind they couldn't explain. Inside, Kaya collapsed into the rancher's arms. He didn't say anything. He just held her. Outside, the snow covered the old footprints. But inside, something stayed uncovered. Truth. fragile and defiant, breathing slow. Spring did not arrive loudly, it came in small ways. The melting edge of the snowbank, the soft drip from the roof at noon, the green blade breaking through frozen soil without asking permission. The wind still howled at night, but it no longer sounded like morning. It sounded like breath. Kaya sat in the rocking chair now. Wrapped in a wool shawl, legs resting on a cushion, she peeled apples slowly with a small knife the rancher had sharpened for her. The cabin no longer felt like a hiding place. It felt like a memory they chose to keep living in. Her brother had gone back to the valley, to the old lands they once played on as children. He promised to return in the fall. He left behind a carved wooden flute and a smile Kaya hadn't worn in years. The rancher built a ramp outside. No one asked, no one thanked. One morning, she wheeled herself to the porch just as the sun crested the eastern hills, and she watched him pour coffee into a second cup without turning. He placed it beside her chair, same as he did every morning now. No words, just presence he had begun carving again. Not horses this time, but trees, wind, hands holding birds. Small tokens he left on the windowsill or by her pillow. Kaya never asked what they meant. She just touched them softly, as if memory could be absorbed through wood. Sometimes they sat in silence for hours, not because there was nothing to say, but because there was nothing left to prove. One morning, weeks later, the sheriff's badge arrived in a brown envelope. No note, just metal and silence. Kaya stared at it for a long time, then dropped it into the fire. The flames didn't flare. They just accepted it like everything else they'd burned to keep warm. The cabin breathed. So did they. And on a soft morning, when the wind was warm and the fields moved like a sea of soft gold, Kaya spoke as the rancher fixed the hinge on the door.